At first glance, Baki is strange. The characters look off-putting if you're not used to the art style, and the fights are completely unhinged. It's a lot to take in, and for many people, it prevents them from watching or reading the series as a whole. But there's still something about Baki that pulls people in. While a lot of that comes down to Keisuke Itagaki's insane sense of motion, weight, and impact, as well as his detailed art, I think Baki ultimately works because it's built on one very simple but very powerful idea. The core of the entire series is stated outright in the opening of the original anime.
男と生まれたからには誰でも一生のうち一度は夢見る地上最強の男グラップラーとは地上最強の男を目指す格闘士のことである
That one piece of dialogue is Baki in pretty much one or two sentences. Because when you strip everything else away, I've always felt like the series is trying to answer one very specific question. What does it actually mean to be strong? And the reason that Baki's been able to run for so long isn't just because Itagaki keeps inventing new fighters or scenarios, but because that question doesn't have one simple answer. On the surface, it's definitely Itagaki just finding excuses for people to fight in increasingly absurd scenarios, but if you keep that one question in mind, the entire cast suddenly starts to make a lot more sense. Every major character represents a different answer to the question of what does it mean to be strong? What is strength? I'll come back to how the cast reflects paths towards strength later on, because Baki Do, which is about to get animated, makes this idea very explicit. The reason this analysis is not going to be very long is because Baki is one of those stories where the themes are pretty easy to understand or easy to feel when you just read or watch the whole thing. Itagaki is very clear about what strength looks like. When you look at the cast, or just Baki by himself, all these characters are built around peak bodybuilding aesthetics, and honestly, beyond that sometimes into something inhuman. But these bodies are not just large or good looking, they're exaggerated and borderline monstrous in the case of people like Yujiro. But the important part here is that these bodies are shown to be functional. They are flexible, explosive, and capable of performing what are basically supernatural feats, which reinforces this idea that a strong body should look good and actually work. You can't just stand there and, expect to be able to do things. Quick side note, I just found out about this. There's a Baki stage play, so I'm gonna have to check that out. It looks pretty cool. For those of you who are new, one of my first ever videos on this channel was about Baki and how I think it would end. So, needless to say, the Netflix take on Son of Ogre was a pretty big disappointment. The father-son fight between Baki and Yujiro is Itagaki at his best, in my opinion, or just one of the times where he's at his best. Visually and philosophically, it's all the themes of Baki coming together. The fight is mainly about fatherhood, that's a major theme there, but I think it's also full of Itagaki's general thoughts on strength that are kind of all over the series. And tons of this stuff failed to make it into the anime. There's one sequence in particular that really stuck with me in the manga. If you've read the manga, you know there are plenty of chapters where the manga cuts away from the main events to just random hypothetical scenarios, and Son of Ogre, the final fight, contained this. It cuts away to a guy who wakes up one morning and realizes he's getting physically stronger. So this guy starts shadowboxing and knocks out the imaginary opponent in front of him in one punch. Now the problem with this is that this guy is convinced that he could do the same thing in real life. So in the words of the manga, the men of the street, the men of the dojo, and the men of the gym all bring this man down to reality, back to his true place in the hierarchy. He was nowhere near as strong as he believed in his head. And while of course in context that chapter ties back around to Yujiro being the one guy who could think this way, I'm just kind of putting it in context of how the themes of Baki apply in real life. So basically I think that in the case of normal people who are not Yujiro Hanma, you have to test your strength against real physical things, whether that be weightlifting or calisthenics or whatever. So this is another big thing that I think the characters in Baki express. They all test themselves in real life. They fight for real, they get hurt, they suffer and lose a lot of times. The prisoner arc is a great example of this. The characters all end up carrying scars from previous fights or events throughout the manga, and this continuity is a great design choice. Going back to testing themselves, even Goki Shibukawa, the Aikido master whose whole mentality is avoiding danger, is shown to have genuine bloodlust. There's a chapter that shows him instigating fights just to test himself. I think that Muhammad Ali Jr. was supposed to represent this idea of how far are you willing to go, but it just wasn't executed well. On one hand, Jr. was being built up for a big fight against Baki as the culmination of an arc, and maybe to signal Baki moving up towards Yujiro tier, but it was a total letdown entertainment-wise. But here's my interpretation of what Junior's purpose was supposed to be. He certainly wasn't weak. He was extremely strong in his first few showcases, and the first time he fought Doppo and Shibukawa, he knocked them out. I think Itagaki wanted to say that he was just strong in the wrong context. That arc was supposed to show that there aren't only different kinds of strength, but also different tiers of strength. Ali Jr. was a sports fighter, and a god tier one at that. But the minute the Baki cast stopped playing by those rules, he was done for. By the time Junior is fighting Baki, Baki has already reached a whole new level. Of course, the way it was done wasn't the best, and I think after Junior's training arc, we could have used a longer fight, but this is what I think Itagaki was trying to say. I also think he repeats the idea in the Retsu boxing arc, or who knows, maybe the whole idea of Ali Jr. just sucked. Another idea related to the central question of what is strength is what I'll call ugly strength. Going back to that Junior arc, he beats Shibukawa and Doppo in their first fair fights, but they come back, catch him, and defeat him while he's injured, taking advantage of his injuries. That's fighting dirty, and that's the point. Winning is winning, and it doesn't matter how clean or honorable it looks. No character embodies this better than Jack Hanma. Jack's entire martial art, Godo, is brutal and completely lacks aesthetics, but it works. He dopes, surgically alters his body, and destroys himself in pursuit of power. But the terrifying part is that for Jack Hanma, it just works. And now he's finally got his own story in Baki Rahan, which I haven't been keeping up with, so I have yet to see how that goes. But going back to that central question, what does it mean to be strong? Each character represents a different answer, a different path towards ultimate strength. Jack, I would say, represents the worst. Well, not the worst, but the most difficult. This leads into one of my favorite aspects of Baki as a whole. Each character doesn't practice a martial art, they are their martial art if it was a human. Their techniques, personalities, and worldviews are all shaped by the philosophy of their style. Baki Do makes this idea explicit through the eyes of Miyamoto Musashi, who visualizes each fighter as a specific image. To him, Baki is an endless field of food, representing infinite techniques and adaptability. I believe that Yujiro Hanma is one of the most fascinating takes on the strongest character archetype, and he still fits this general design philosophy, but he represents something much darker than everyone else in the cast. Yujiro is the pinnacle of strength in Baki's world, but not in a way that's meant to be aspirational. There's a reason he's called the ogre. Over and over again, Yujiro is shown to us as something more or something worse than a regular human. Characters constantly call him a beast, a monster, or a brute. Thematically speaking, Yujiro is not human. He's not human in the way the rest of the cast is. He was always born strong, and because of that, strength itself became meaningless to him. He doesn't grow in the same way that the other cast members do, and so he dominates everything around him. That's why, despite wanting to defeat him, nobody in the cast actually wants to be Yujiro. He's respected, feared, and acknowledged by everyone, but that's really the only ways that most people look at him. The only exception, I'd say, is his son Baki, who accepts him as his father by the end of Son of Ogre, but even then it's not really a regular familial type of love. Speaking of Baki and family ties, I'm really hoping for more Baki and Jack interactions, especially casually. It'd be interesting to have a chapter of them just hanging out or fighting random jobbers as brothers. Going back to Yujiro, I think he also shows us that in Baki's world, might makes right. But not because strength makes you correct, but because strength forces others to accept what you want. Yujiro can do whatever he wants, and the world has no choice but to live with it. Doesn't matter if you're a president or some random guy, Yujiro Hanma chooses your fate, and no amount of security will protect you. What makes Yujiro even more interesting is his own father, Yuichiro Hanma. We barely see him, but everything we're shown implies that he was also absurdly strong, possibly on Yujiro's level or even higher. Still, from what we can see, Yujiro seems to have retained his humanity. He's relaxed and seems kind when he appears to Baki as a ghost. Remember, this is still Itagaki we're talking about. He even appears fully alive in a side story about a young Doppo. From what I can tell, Yuichiro doesn't constantly go around asserting dominance the same way that his son does. The implication is clear. You can reach the top without sacrificing your humanity, and this might be Baki's fate. This contrast becomes especially important when you look at Baki Hanmei himself. By the time he fights his dad in Son of Ogre, he's strong enough to stand up to him as an equal, and visually, I love this part, how the manga goes out of its way to mirror them. Once both of them go full demon mode, their stances, expressions, and even that grin are identical. But even as Baki reaches Yujiro's level, or maybe just below it, he never stops being himself. Baki doesn't become Yujiro. He never loses his kindness or emotional openness. He's still him. Even at the end of the fight, after pushing himself further than ever before, Baki still has his own fighting spirit. And we see this in the invisible dinner scene. For a moment in the story, it even feels like Yujiro himself has the potential to change. To me, it looked like Itagaki was setting up the idea that Yujiro still had things left to learn. Not a redemption arc, but more like just getting him to chill out. That maybe strength without emotional growth was still an incomplete version of strength. And throughout Yujiro's appearances in the series, you can see hints of this. Despite being treated like an unstoppable god, there are also times where he behaves in emotional or childish ways. He throws tantrums and gets petty. He reacts emotionally when things don't go his way. These moments don't humanize him in a positive sense, but they do reinforce the idea that he is still incomplete as a person. So, I see Yujiro as somewhat of a warning. That doesn't mean he's unimpressive though. He's awesome in terms of fighting skills, power, and influence. You just can't forget that he is the final villain of the story, and a monster of a man, if he is a man at all. Yujiro himself explains that when you reach his level, strength loses its value entirely. I think another part of this, the message of Baki, is that chasing strength matters more than possessing it. That's why the characters are always training, fighting, or pushing themselves. Even Hanayama, who doesn't train traditionally, grows stronger through experience alone. If you had no journey towards strength, if you were born at the top, there would be nothing stopping you from becoming someone like Yujiro. And despite everything, I don't think anyone really wants to be that twisted. If Baki was really about being the strongest and nothing else, Yujiro would be the protagonist. You'd follow his random adventures as he made mockeries of world leaders, fought armies, and so on. Which could be a nice side story, but still. I'm now going to talk about one of my favorite characters in the series, Musashi. Baki Do makes the point that Musashi doesn't belong in the modern world. Even compared to Yujiro, Musashi is just straight up weird. Now the difference between Yujiro and Musashi is that you're not supposed to think of Yujiro as a human. Yujiro is a supernatural being, an animal only shaped like a man. Musashi, though, is very much human. He's eloquent, can hold conversations, has good etiquette, and is perfectly willing to have sparring matches and compliment the cast for their skills. There's just one issue. Musashi's idea of a fight is not the same as ours in the modern day. Musashi believes that the only way to gain strength or to make himself known is to turn people into sushi. He rises through the world by cutting. This willingness to just off people makes him a serious threat to the cast, and I think that Baki Do really ups the stakes more than any other series. Seriously, it feels more serious than ever. He does not belong with the rest of the Baki cast, and bringing him into the modern era proves to be a huge mistake. One of the reasons I love Musashi as a character is because, other than the fact that he's a weapon of mass destruction, he's kind of a chill guy. Like, especially early on, you could easily hang out with him. I think a theme of Baki Do is sort of de-romanticizing the idea of Musashi or samurai as a whole, as he slowly becomes more and more obsessed with fighting people and cutting them down. But when he's first brought back, he's just kind of a normal dude. He's willing to let people live and do more demonstration type stuff. So this is another thing that Baki shows us, that while strength is timeless, society and how we measure strength changes. There are aspects that anyone across time can recognize, but there are also things that will be different. and in some cases the old ways are better, and in other cases the new ways are definitely safer and better. Strength in Baki is treated as a universal language. I already talked about one time traveler with Musashi, but Pickle is another example of this. He can't even talk, and may not even be human in the same sense that most people are, but he can definitely understand the meaning of fighting just to see who's better. Testing one's strength connects people across time, different cultures, and history in a way that's almost comparable to love. Even the Baki and Kozue scenes fit into this idea, as Baki has to understand love in order to understand or reach a new level of strength. They are linked, they're two sides of the same coin. To end this video, my biggest hope for Baki Do is Musashi's dialogue. They have to get that right. If Musashi does not speak in some kind of outdated or ancient dialect, it feels like a massive missed opportunity. Speaking of which, I heard something similar happen with Sukuna in JJK, where he was supposed to speak Old Japanese. I'm not sure about that, it's just hearsay, so let me know if I'm wrong on that front. I've talked before about Baki's art and how it conveys motion, so today I wanted to focus more about my thoughts on its themes. Let me know your favorite Baki arc, your favorite character, and why. Like, comment, subscribe, and thank you all for watching. I'd love to hear your thoughts on Baki, its characters, and who you like best in the cast. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.